210. This concept map begins with the classical triumvirate, Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, but deliberately expands the conversation by including early feminist critiques and symbolic interactionism. The project traces a central question across classical and critical theory. How does modernity generate disconnection, and where might meaning be recovered? By starting with the structural critiques and moving toward theories of the self, this map builds a through line from alienation to anomie to disenchantment, and finally to reflexive identity. In doing so, it not only connects major thinkers from the course, but moves beyond the canon, engaging alternative epistemologies and asking how knowledge, value, and social life might be reimagined. Let's start with Karl Marx. He believed that humans are creative by nature, and that we shape our world through labor. But under capitalism, that creative potential becomes distorted. People are born into economic systems they didn't choose, and those systems shape how they live, work, and relate to each other. This is where alienation comes in. Marx describes 4 ways workers become disconnected from the product they make, from the process of making it, from other workers, and from what he calls species being, our deeper human potential. Work becomes something external and imposed rather than something meaningful. Instead of expressing ourselves through labor, we become strangers to it and to ourselves. And this isn't just about how someone feels at work. Alienation is a structural feature of capitalist production. It's built into how property and labor are organized. The issue isn't individual failure. It's how systems create disconnection on purpose. But this raises bigger questions. Is disconnection always economic? Or can people feel unanchored even outside of capitalism, when shared norms or moral values start to fall apart? That's where Durkheim enters this conversation, and we'll shift to his work now. After exploring Marx's critique of capitalism, Emile Durkheim offers a different take on what holds or breaks societies apart. For Durkheim, the problem isn't economic exploitation, but the erosion of moral regulation. He believed that society was more than a collection of individuals. It was a moral force that shaped action by binding people together through shared norms and collective beliefs. These shared norms are what give individuals a sense of purpose, belonging, and direction. But in modern societies, especially as the division of labor becomes more complex, those norms begin to weaken. Durkheim called this condition anomie, a state of normlessness. It emerges during periods of rapid economic or social change when institutions struggle to regulate behavior. Without a clear moral framework, individuals feel untethered, not just from others, but from any stable sense of meaning. Durkheim's insight was that this disorientation isn't a personal failure, it's structural. He saw human beings as a homo duplex, torn between selfish desires and the moral demands of collective life. In traditional societies, cohesion came from similarity, what he called mechanical solidarity. But as societies modernized, cohesion had to come from interdependence or organic solidarity. And for that to work, individuals need institutions that provide moral regulation. As older institutions like religion and family lose their cohesive power, Durkheim believed occupational structures must take on this integrative role, offering not just the division of tasks, but a shared sense of moral responsibility and connection. And this opens up another layer of questions. If modernity weakens both material solidarity and moral cohesion, where does that leave us? What happens when rules still exist, but they no longer offer meaning? That's where Weber picks up, asking what happens when rationalization replaces morality as the dominant organizing force. So we've talked about Durkheim, who traced modern disconnection to the breakdown of shared moral norms. Weber moves us into a different kind of crisis, one where norms don't disappear, but become cold, calculated, and detached from meaning. The world isn't disordered, it's overordered. For Weber, the defining feature of modernity is rationalization, the spread of rules, efficiency, and control into every corner of life. This is what he called disenchantment. For Weber, the defining feature of modernity is rationalization, the spread of rules, efficiency, and control into every corner of life. He saw this as a double-edged process. It brings precision and predictability. but at the cost of human spontaneity, creativity, and moral vision. This is what he called disenchantment, a world stripped of the sacred, the mysterious, and the deeply felt. Instead of asking what's meaningful, we ask what's efficient. Rationality becomes technical. It tells us how to achieve goals, but not whether we should pursue them in the first place. The clearest expression of this bureaucracy, a system governed by impersonal rules, hierarchical structures, and standardized procedures. It promises fairness, but it also depersonalizes social life. As Weber puts it, we become trapped in an iron cage, not by chaos, but by calculated control. People become functionaries within institutions, defined by their roles more than by their humanity. Unlike Durkheim, who believed in institutions could restore cohesion, Weber was more skeptical. Even functioning systems can leave people adrift. Rationalization may organize life, but it doesn't inspire it. So we're left with a deeper tension. What happens when the systems that govern us no longer nourish us? And can those who have historically been excluded from those systems, particularly under patriarchy, offer ways of organizing value, meaning, and belonging? And that tension sets us up perfectly for what comes next, as we turn to early feminist thinkers to explore how meaning and value might be reimagined by those historically excluded. The trajectory we followed so far, from alienation to anomie to disenchantment, has traced how modernity fragments both structure and meaning, but these dominant accounts often reflect only a partial view. For much of classical theory, the male experience is treated as universal, and reason itself is framed as neutral, when in reality, it has long been shaped by patriarchal assumptions. Feminist thinkers like Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Estelle intervene by challenging the foundations of Enlightenment thought, not only by demanding inclusion, but by asking who gets to count as a rational subject in the first place. Wollstonecraft's writing during the French Revolution used language of liberalism to assert that if reason is a universal human faculty, then denying women access to education is not only unjust, but irrational. In a vindication of the rights of women, she claimed that women's exclusion contradicts Enlightenment ideals themselves. Still, her critique remained bounded by bourgeoisie liberalism. She sought equality within existing institutions, not their radical transformation, which is why the course frames her as a bourgeois feminist advocating for equity in distribution rather than structural change. Mary Estelle, writing decades earlier, mounted a deeper philosophical challenge. She questioned the gendered constructions of knowledge by drawing from Descartes and Locke. While Descartes emphasized innate ideas, which historically privileged men, Estelle turned to Locke's tabula rasa, arguing that if all minds begin as blank slates, then the exclusion of women from education is arbitrary and unjust. For Estelle, reason wasn't merely a capacity women shared with men. It was the very foundation for claiming access to truth, knowledge, and spiritual development. Both thinkers reveal how Enlightenment ideals were not abstract claims to truth. They were socially constructed systems that excluded women from reason, knowledge, and agency. If rationality itself is shaped by power, then meaning must be located elsewhere, not in top-down systems, but in everyday social life. And that's exactly where George Herbert Mead takes us next. He shifts the lens from static categories to dynamic interaction, exploring how the self emerges through role-taking, shared symbols, and the imaginative coordination of experience. So, after tracing critiques of capitalism, moral breakdown, instrumental rationality, and patriarchal exclusion, Mead brings us to a different kind of insight, that the self is not as a given, but is emergent through social interaction. Rather than starting with systems or institutions, Mead starts with the social act, asking how meaning, identity, and cooperation arise through shared gestures, significant symbols, and imaginative processes. Unlike classical behaviorists who reduce human action to stimulus and response, Mead argues that human interaction is intentional. It involves reflexivity, the ability to imagine others' perspectives, and anticipate their reactions before acting. This is only possible through language and other symbolic systems that allow us to take the role of the other. And that role taking isn't just performative, it's formative. Through it, individuals learn to see themselves from the outside, giving rise to the self as a social process. Importantly, this self isn't innate. It doesn't pre-exist interaction. It emerges first in relation to specific others, like family or peers, and then through engagement with the generalized other. The broader social expectations that shape our behavior in this view, the self is not imposed or fixed, but continually reformed in relation to others. What Mead offers us, then, is a theory of subjectivity that rejects universal reason, divine hierarchy, or structural determinism. Instead, he positions identity as relational, built through imagination, cooperation, and symbolic exchange. This reframes the disconnection explored by earlier theorists. If Marx located alienation in labor, Durkheim in moral collapse, and Weber in rationalized systems, Mead shifts the focus to interaction as the source of meaning. And if feminist thinkers challenge the exclusions of the patriarchal knowledge systems, Mead shows us how identity might be co-created through social participation rather than imposed from above. Mead doesn't deny the fragmentation of modern life. He reframes it. Meaning isn't recovered through tradition or system overhaul, but built in real time through shared symbols and mutual recognition. And in that, we're left with a sociological view of the self as process, not product, and the social world is something always under construction. I appreciate you listening. This project has given me the chance to trace the major thinkers and concepts we've explored in this course, and to piece them together into a larger narrative. Sometimes theory can feel dense or disconnected, but creating this map helped me actually see how these ideals build on one another, challenge one another, and shape how we understand social life. The creative format was a refreshing shift from the usual research paper. It pushed me to think differently, not just about what each theorist said, but about how their ideas connect and where they still resonate. In the end, I came away with a stronger understanding of classical social theory and why it still matters today. Thank you.